Good afternoon, everyone. I want to go ahead and get started. It is our final event for this year's Adam Smith Week. I hope that you have, I know that many of you have attended several of these events, and I hope that you've enjoyed them, found them worthwhile, and that you have seen, and I'll claim, right, whether explicitly or implicitly, right, that the work and theories of Adam Smith, right, are applicable to all the things that we've been talking about this week. And that, again, Adam Smith, 300 years after his birth, is still an incredibly relevant figure for us to be thinking about. As I get started today, again, I want to thank a few people for all of their support. I want to thank the American Institute for Economic Research. I want to thank the Department of Economics and the Urban Studies program for their support in helping us to promote these events, to sponsor them, and all the things that they've done to encourage people to attend. At this point, I'm looking around and I think I know everyone in the room, so I'm not going to even really bother to introduce myself. But I will just say that, as always, if you want to learn more about the Center for Public Choice and Market Process and what we do, right, that I encourage you to go out into all of our social media platforms. I encourage you to grab some of the information, right? We do have, again, a variety of events that are worth thinking about, right? Our economics book colloquiums for our students, our faculty research fellowships, our free market speaker series that we have going on all year long, right? And of course, in our mentoring programs, both the Market Process Scholars and the Public Choice Associates. So I've talked a good bit about the Market Process Scholars. It's a multi-year mentoring program, but we also started a few years ago our Public Choice Associates program, which is 1 year for the students who, unfortunately, for whatever reason, we didn't identify or didn't know about us early on in their academic careers. And at this point, right, I want to actually introduce to you one of our Public Choice Associates, Andrea Kimson, who's going to introduce our speaker this afternoon.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Kimson. I have the honor of introducing our speaker for this afternoon. Alain Bertaud is a senior fellow at New York University's Marron Institute of Urban Management, and from 2014 to 2020, he taught a graduate course in urban economic planning called Markets, Design, and the City. In his book, Order Without Design, How Markets Shape Cities, published by MIT Press in November 2018, he argues that a city's chief attraction resides first in the people already living in it. People and firms, through markets, creates the spontaneous order. The top-down design infrastructure serves the spontaneous order, not the other way around. Cities are primarily labor markets that form the substructure on which all the other social amenities are built. Bertaud previously held the position of principal urban planner at the World Bank, where he worked on developing housing projects in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. He also worked in urban reforms of former command economies in Eastern Europe, Russia, China, and Vietnam. Before joining the World Bank, he worked as a resident urban planner in several cities around the world, including Bangkok, San Salvador, Port-au-Prince in Haiti, Sana'a in Yemen, New York, Paris, Tlemcen in Algeria, and Chandigarh in India. Bertaud's research, in collaboration with his late wife, Marie Agnes, aims to bridge the gap between operational urban planning and urban economics. Their work focuses primarily on the interaction between urban forms, real estate markets, and regulations. Bertaud earned the Architect DPLG diploma from the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1967. Apologies for the butchered French at the end, but I will now pass things off to Professor Bertaud.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much for, oh, sorry, I have to start first. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come back to Charleston. My granddaughter graduated from the College of Charleston 3 years ago. I'm always very pleased to come back. And here I am an architect. I'm not a philosopher, and I am only a part-time economist. Some colleagues call me a feral economist. So I will have the arrogance to talk about two philosophers from the point of view of an architect. So first, Adam Smith. This is the well-known statue in Edinburgh, and I've traveled a lot, and I have seen a statue of Adam Smith only in one other place than Edinburgh. Oh, sorry. Can any of you guess where is this statue? In China, Chengdu, at the University of Finance and Economics. In the CBD of this city, there is a gigantic statue of Chairman Mao. But at the university, there is a statue of Adam Smith, which is an interesting thing. And we will see that at times, I have the feeling that Chinese mayors, who are usually members of the Communist Party, have a better understanding of markets than many of our own mayors. So this is the other contender, Jean Jacques Rousseau, who called himself a citizen of Geneva. And I don't think he ever said he was Swiss, he was citizen of Geneva. And so he was a contemporary of Adam Smith. Nobody knows if they ever met. They were in Paris more or less at the same time. It's not certain that they met. They had common friend though. So this is what I will be talking about. First, I will just maybe a bit simplify, saying that Adam Smith and Rousseau had a completely different view about the public welfare. Adam Smith was an optimist about humanity, although he acknowledged, the weakness of human beings, but he was an optimist about society, where Rousseau was a pessimist. He thought that civilization had been detrimental to humanity. There was this good savage, which represented and it shows in his philosophy. And so Adam Smith was, considered that individuals, as individuals, contributed positively to society most of the time, not always, most of the time, where Rousseau thought that it was opposite, that individuals have to be really, they have to submit to the general will. And of course, when you say the general will, nobody knows who decides what the general will is. And that, of course, eventually, some people think that he was responsible for the downside of the French Revolution and that, and I suppose it was true. So that's all good and well about philosophy, but how does that apply to urban planning? None of them really spoke about urban planning. None of them obviously spoke about zoning or Euclidean zoning. So how does it apply? I think that the view of those two philosophers, in fact, indirectly influence urban planning. Although most urban planners, I think, have never read Adam Smith, or barely read, probably never read Rousseau either. But this happened, that people are influenced by ideas which are floating around without knowing what the source of those ideas are. So I will first, after that, I will briefly describe what I think is the first task, the most important task of urban planners. And then I will move then to what they do and what relates to Rousseau and what relates to Adam Smith in that. And finally, my main objective in, I would say in life, but at least in my book, is precisely to move urban planners from Rousseau to Adam Smith, if that is possible. So there are these two opposite schools of thought, that I describe. Adam Smith had this idea that cities or society emerge from a spontaneous order, which is created by individuals who pursue their own interest. And he acknowledged, of course, the role of government, but the government is mostly there to set the rule and develop an infrastructure, whether legal. In the term of planning, we will use the word infrastructure literally. That means building, road, public space. That will allow this order to emerge. So you see, the order of priority is first the spontaneous order coming from individuals, and on top of that, you have a government who will, kind of not control it but support it. Now, for Jean Jacques Rousseau, he always talked about the general will, and again, without too much defining who decides what is this general will, and it's clear, especially in the social contract, that you think that any individual interest is necessarily antagonistic to the general will and therefore has to be corrected. And then he talks also a lot about virtue, that to follow the general will is virtuous. So as soon as you start saying what I advocate is virtue, you are you're not defending a really point of view. You are taking a moral high ground over your adversary, and it's very difficult to argue anything. So Adam Smith is rather skeptical about people who are, he call it those who affect to trade for the public good. This quotation, I think, is rather typical of Adam Smith. And it seems here that, in a certain way, he's a little talking about Rousseau. Excuse me. Now, let us contrast that with Rousseau. Do you want the general will to be accomplished? It's so make sure that all the particular wills conform to it. And again, virtue. And since virtue is nothing other than this conformity of the particular to the general will, to put it another way, let virtue reign. This is I mean, to me, is a terrible quotation, but I think that I will try to demonstrate that this is a bit was what planners are defending, that they incarnate the general will, and that people like the butcher have to, the butcher that Smith quote very often, the butcher provides his meal, have to conform to this general will. So, this is still philosophical. How does that apply to urban planning? Well, first a quotation again of Adam Smith. And when I read this quotation, I'm thinking, well, he was probably not thinking about urban planning, but that it applies exactly to urban planning. The man of system, and we are going to meet in this presentation a number of men of system, seems to imagine that he can arrange the different members of a great society with as much ease at the end arranges the different pieces upon a chessboard. He does not consider that in the great chessboard of human society, every single piece has a principle of motion of his own, altogether different from that which the legislator might choose to impress upon it. So here, in a way, he anticipates Hayek here, saying that the person who wants to rearrange our society does not have the information to do it, although they pretend to do it. And therefore, whatever this person or this institution impose will be arbitrary. So in the middle of the 19th century, appears a new trend in urban planning. And there were a number of utopian cities which were built around a moral or social order objective. And I think that this, in a way, in a less obvious way, continue a bit to this day. You know, for instance, the utopian centers, utopian thinkers, the most well-known were Fourier, Robert Owen, Contender, Ebenezer Howard. By the way, quite a number of them had not that much success in Europe, but quite a number of followers in the United States, strangely enough. For instance, one man of system, as described by Adam Smith, will be Fourier. And here is one follower of Fourier describe what needs to be done to organize a society. Again, they were talking here about utopian cities. They were not talking just about fraternities or something like that. Basically, they will want somebody would decide. If you read the last part of the quotation, a complete system of physical, mental, and emotional development intimately connected with daily pursuit should be provided for. Now, you say, well, this is in old time, this is gone, this is an utopian. Well, this is a quotation now from Bill de Blasio, who was mayor of New York, 2 terms, he was elected. This is what Bill de Blasio said in an interview. You have the reference of the interview because it's so extraordinary that you may think I'm making it up. Look, if I had my druthers, the city government will determine every single plot of land. Our development will proceed, and there will be very stringent requirements around income levels, and rents. This is amazing for somebody who is responsible for Wall Street. It's in New York. It is not a little utopian city somewhere, in the mountain or somewhere. And then he adds that. That's a world I had loved to see. People had loved to have a very, very powerful government, including a federal government, involved in directly addressing their day-to-day reality. This is Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York. So this is where I tell you that, when I worked in China, I will have much more confidence in a communist mayor in China than some mayor of the United States. You see here, again, this complete naivete about, on top of it here, he's talking about the federal government, not even the municipal government, which will address the day-to-day reality of every citizen. So again, if we get back to Adam Smith, it means that the butcher force will have to rely on the central government in order to determine where he will locate his shop, how large will be this shop, how much land he will consume to have this butcher shop. That all these things will be given to him by a central government. And again, we get back to Hayek. Obviously, we know that not even a local government, not even a neighborhood government will know what this butcher needs in order to operate. So I continue with all the followers, but at the Ebenezer Howard Garden City, I think it prefigures very, very much the zoning, the Euclidean zoning, which is now used in the United States. I don't want to give you the detail of that, but you certainly familiar maybe with this graph, there is even a place here, if you, there is a special zone for the inebriated. For some reason, there is a zone for where all the inebriated. Now, they don't mention if they are inebriated permanently or from time to time, but I hope our zoning board doesn't have this, they could have the idea to add that, to have an overlay for inebriated or something like that. Anyway, Corbusier was a thinker also, which was very much in the same tradition of the utopian. And I call that against Jane Jacobs. Yesterday we had a very interesting talk about Jane Jacobs by Sandy Ikeda, and many of the things of Jane Jacobs about the streets, all the streets are useful precisely because the street is where people meet each other in a certain way. And Corbusier, for some reason, decided that we must kill the street. Now, nobody, it's not that there were a lot of people who thought we must kill the street. It was his idea himself, and he thought he could impose it. And he says no modern city could emerge until we kill the street. Now, so that was his plan for the center of, this is this plan Voisin was to destroy all the center of Paris, the Marais in particular, which is now one of the most valuable, most expensive place to live, and I would say rather charming. And so you will tell me, well, why do you show that? After all, it was not implemented, and very few projects of the Corbusier, except individual houses, were not implemented, and except Chandigarh too, where I work. So why bother? Well, because of this, posthumously, his ideas were adopted every time the government was involved. So this is a posthumous success. It's a suburb of New York. Sorry, it's not a suburb, it's the Bronx. It's a city of New York. It was built in 1973. It's in New York, we call that a Mitchell-Ama. It's a form of subsidy that it's not really public housing, but something like that. So you see, he has killed the street. He managed to kill the street. So ideas are important. Although nobody ever asked to kill the street. I've never seen a referendum about killing the street. If you ask people in any city of the world, whether it's London, New York, or Shanghai, do you think removing the street is important? They will not say that. So it was just, again, an idea floating, but for some reason was implemented all over the world. So for me, the planner's main task, is to separate public space from private space, so private lot, so that the market can operate in the private lot. But without the public space, that means the streets, a large city cannot operate. You could have private streets for small city or from small neighborhood, developed privately, but if you have a very large agglomeration, you need an infrastructure and you need a government intervention. This infrastructure could be privately operated, but in order to build it, I do not see the possibility to do it entirely privately, although you will argue that, for instance, a city like Vancouver, the railway, the Atlantic to Pacific Railway, the Canadian, they selected, it's a railway company was selected the site of Vancouver, and they created entirely a grid of infrastructure because they thought it was a good port, and indeed they were right. So in a way you could say, well, it was provided privately, but eventually it became public. You had to maintain this through taxation, and it's very difficult to have a very large city which grows over time, and let's say the layout of the infrastructure done entirely privately and maintained privately. I've never seen it. I'm ready to learn. If you know a very large city where the streets are maintained privately, I'm ready to convert myself. But I need some proof there. So, well, this is a repeat of. Sorry. This is an example of privately provided streets. You see, on one side, you have New York Wall Street, and on the other side, the Marais of Paris, that Corbusier wanted to destroy. So as a neighborhood, it's nice. It's still, if you have a large city made of streets like that, which are, it's not randomly distributed. Well, it is randomly distributed because those streets are following property right, which were usually farms. Originally, all land is farm, and then subdivided depending on the boundary of the farm. So you have a network of streets, which at the neighborhood level could be even charming, but at the metropolitan level, if you think of a city of 1 million, which will have street designed that way, it will not operate because precisely large cities are labor market. Labor market means that you should be able to move from one side of a metropolitan area to another in hopefully less than half an hour or at the maximum of 1 hour. So that requires a very heavy infrastructure, which has to be designed top down. Now, it has to be designed top down, but in order to serve the emerging order, which is done by the different individuals who decide to locate themselves in one side or another and consume, the land they decide to consume, not the other way around. Many municipal engineers would design infrastructure, unfortunately, and again, that's my experience all over the world. Think of an optimum infrastructure, an optimum system of transport. It could be transit, could be bicycle, could be anything. And they decide, well, this is our chosen system of transport, then land use should be completely changed in order to optimize the operation of this mean of transport. I think it's opposite. We should design a transport system to maintain this labor market, but to take into account precisely the way the people distribute themselves and the firm distributes themselves along a metropolitan area, not the other way around. So this is one of the first plan. I mean, there were other plans in Asia like that, but that was a plan of Miletus in the 6th century BC. And the first urban planner in the Western world, Hippodamus. This was, by the way, also the city of the mathematician Thales. And what do we have here? We have a grid, and two different grids, by the way. And then we have in the middle a number of amenities, public amenities. And so the planner selected those in the middle. Those were the place where, the agora, where people met, which is, again, it shows how important it is, what the goal of a city is really for people to meet. And the Greeks already have decided that this was important, so they will allocate a special piece of land so the citizen could meet there. And then there was a sport ground, the tribunal, and then the theater. The Greek always thought that the theater was absolutely indispensable. I think they designed theater much before they designed sewer system, which it's an interesting way of looking at it. And so that's, to me, is really the job of the planner, to separate what is private and what is public. Because on the private space, the market, Adam Smith's system will operate. While in the public space, it has to be managed and maintained entirely top down by some authority, could be private, could be public, but it has to be done. And it's top down because there is no market mechanism which will tell you what is the correct, what is the correct use of a street, how much you allocate to sidewalk, how much you allocate to cars, bicycle, or whatever. So that has to be designed in a way top down. Unfortunately, our planners pay a lot of attention to the private lots where they should leave them mostly alone, and completely neglect the public space. And they are the one who are responsible for it. If I show you, well, you are certainly familiar with the street of New York. It's a complete mess. You have people cycling on the sidewalk. You have a delivery truck during the day. You have double parking all the time. You have free parking along the most expensive roads of New York. And it's a complete mess. It's not designed. It's not. But the planners tell you exactly what is the size of a bathroom, and you will not get a building permit if you design a bathroom slightly differently from what the planners say. So you see, you have a complete reverse. I still do not explain why it is so. I just it's just the way it is. So this is one way. For instance, a planner I admire, Cerda's, the extension plan of Barcelona. You see, Barcelona, when Cerda was operating, was this black blob. This was the medieval Renaissance city, in a way, which was there. And he had the commission to expand the city, and he designed a network of streets, which were more than 20 times the existing one. And that, I think, was fantastic because it allows the land market to work, to have a huge supply of land. The streets were not all, say they were surveyed, but they were not paved or anything. But people in advance knew where the streets were and where the private land was. So if somebody started to build here and the landowner asked too much for the land, then they knew they could move, so there was a lot of competition because of this large definition. And I think it works very well to the advantage of Barcelona. Now, one could argue, he did that in 1855, that whether the octagonal blocks that he designed or the widths of streets were the right one. I think it's irrelevant compared to the benefit of having defined the private, where the market will operate and where it will not operate. I think the advantage of that is much higher than to argue whether some streets should be wider or smaller or something, or whether the blocks should be rectangular or than octagonal. Now, because Cerda was a planner, he decided also to design the inside of the blocks. He didn't go into the size of bathroom, but so this is what he proposed, and thank God he failed in that. This is what a block in Barcelona looks like now, and then you can see here the variety of use, by the way. And you see the market operating, some blocks, for instance, are even a small central alley in the middle. Some have some sport grounds, some have nothing, some have, so that's a way a city life, that a lot of people are competing, doing different things, and that's the charm of Barcelona. At the same time, you see that the exact streets that Cerda designed are exactly there now. The municipality right now, by the way, is trying to change, use, of course, the same right-of-way. You cannot change this right-of-way. It's there forever. But trying to change the way the right-of-way is used, I'm watching it carefully to see if they can improve what is there or if they will mess it up. We don't know. But if they mess it up, it will be relatively easy to redesign it eventually. So it's always good to try things, and even if it fails. Now, our zoning plans, our zoning plans are there. By the way, it always bothered me in the United States to hear about Euclidean zoning. I think it was very unfortunate that the first case, defending zoning was in the city of Euclid. I think it gives a, let's say, gravitas to zoning that it should not have. If the case has been Topeka, Kansas, you say Topekan zoning, people will question it. But if you say we have to abolish Euclidean zoning, people think, well, Euclid, you mean parallel line will cross each other then from now on if you abolish the, So it gives, I think, a rationality that zoning doesn't have. So I think that, let's say, the justification of zoning is really very much, a lot of it is very much Rousseau common good. So somebody has to decide what is a common good, and that's it. So, so you see, in the 19th, during the Industrial Revolution, there was indeed a need for separating certain use, because the housing and industrial area were completely mixed up. The industrial area fantastically polluting. It's still, by the way, during the Soviet Union, I have seen lead smelter in the middle of a residential area, but only the Soviet Union could do the thing because they have so much the cult of the factory, the proletarian worker thing. So it was a symbol. So they thought that it was a good thing. But so normally, yes, there is a case for having some type of zoning to remove or to not allow heavy industries from residential area. Now, anybody who knows about land market will know that nobody will come and propose a lead smelter in the middle of Charleston because the land would be too expensive. Nobody would do that. There is no reason to do it. And most of our now, many of our so-called industries are in fact high-tech thing. There are a lot of category of activities which a bit escapes zoning. Nobody knows if it's really industrial or not, or office or not. And I think that there should be much more tolerance for, the traditional zoning. So this, again, the idea of the zoning is always based on common interest and the general will. Although, again, a quotation from Thomas Sowell, the most basic question is not what is best, but who shall decide what is best? I think this is a key idea again of beyond zoning in a certain way. So here I will talk about what I call the micro-regulation of cities, and I think it comes directly from the idea of Rousseau and Fourier that somebody have to incarnate the general will and the welfare of the population, which is necessarily antagonistic against the people who live in the city, the interest of the people who live in the city. So I will just talk very briefly about New York zoning, and which to me, is there to prevent illusory negative externality, what economists call negative externality. And they are trying more and more to shape cities through regulation in the name of the public interest. If you read, especially since the 60s, if you read the literature coming from the Planning Commission in the Department of Urban Planning in New York, they say explicitly that they want to redesign the city. For instance, I remember when I first emigrated to New York in '68, everybody in the planning department was had a great admiration for the Seagram building in Park Avenue, designed by Smith Van der Rohe, which is indeed a very, very nice skyscraper with the plaza in front. And they decided it was such a nice building that they could design regulations so there would be many Seagram buildings all over New York. They thought that you could do good design just through regulation. And of course, it was a disaster because, the Seagram family, it was the most expensive, maybe still the most expensive building in the world, in terms, if you update, because it was a Seagram family who made some of their money, I think, during the prohibition, and they wanted to acquire a little kind of a civic prestige. So money was no object. Mies van der Rohe was the free hand, and indeed they designed the building fantastically expensive but very attractive, and in particular using a lot of very expensive land just for a plaza, without having that much height either. So it was really exceptional. Now, in their naivete, the urban planners say, well, this is great. Let us have a regulation so we will have a cigarette building all over the city. And so they gave bonus of floor ratio in order to create a plaza in front. But every time a corporation did that, there was a lawyer who told them, wait a minute, if somebody breaks their leg on your plaza, you will be responsible. This is private land. This is not public land. So at the beginning, I think many architects then, under the influence of the advice of lawyers, designed the plaza so they would be the most hostile possible. So they would be the least possible people using them. So that's the problem with, again, designing, trying to get good designs for regulation. Good design comes from the intention of the person who pay the architect and the talent of the architect, of course. It doesn't, you cannot have good designs just by regulation. Now, here is an example again. There was a wonderful article, very well researched in the New York Times some time ago, and they found that 40% of the building of Manhattan could not be built today. And this, the track here, all the buildings which are in red here could not be built today. And it's not because they will fail fire regulation or sanitation. Entirely, and I will describe that more, entirely in terms of how high they are, the floor ratio, or even the amount of commercial building or the number of dwelling units per acre. So let us go to see a bit the detail of that. So here in green here, that's the area where they have too many business. Some planners in New York decided that he knew exactly the number of business which should be in Manhattan, and he imposed this magic number on the city. So you have area that means that those green buildings here, if they were destroyed and somebody wanted to rebuild them, they could not stay the same use, because there are too many business there. Here are too many apartments. Would you believe that some planner decided how many apartments were there, and they thought that they were already too many, and it needs to be zoned so there would be less. Again, magic number. Who decide how many apartments are in New York? What is the rationale for it? This is more detailed. This is around NYU, so you can see. So these are all the red building here. You see this Washington Square here, and NYU over here. All this red building could not be rebuilt the way they are. Again, not because of fire regulation or anything, only in terms of height. And we'll see here the details. Too many dwelling units. So this is the West Village. Now, you could say, well, maybe those planners know that maybe too many dwelling units will create congestion or, overcrowding. So they know something we don't know. Well, one way to know if they know something we don't know is to look at the price of apartment here. An apartment of 1,000 square feet is $1.5 million. So it is not poor people who are crammed in defective housing. It's the richest people of Manhattan who decide to live there, but they are really overcrowding this thing. They don't know that how bad this neighborhood is. Too much lot coverage. Again, here a magic number. What is the right lot coverage for a lot in Manhattan? So you see the majority again in the West Village is too much lot coverage. too much commercial density, too many, what goes through their mind? What do they know that we don't know? Again, this will affect the butcher of Adam Smith. They suddenly somebody would say, well, you cannot have your butcher shop there because zoning say that there are too many shops there. Again, complete lack of information, complete arbitrariness. And again, the justification is for public welfare, the majority, the will of the majority. It's not, there is no other rationale for it. Now we are in New York and in Manhattan, and in all this area, these are the buildings which are too tall. And again, here we have all on the east side of Central Park, the east side, which is like also a very expensive area. Michael Bloomberg has a house like that. I do not know if it's too high or not, but he's in the middle of too high building anyway. And again, who decide how high buildings should be in Manhattan? Why should it be? This complete arbitrariness is and again, can be attributed only to a hubris, a conviction in the part of the planner that somehow they are defending the public interest against developer. Instead of talking about more apartment or, if you talk about taller building, you are talking either more office building or more apartment or both. And they say, if the developer wants to do it, must be bad. They are going to make money out of it. Instead of saying, we are desperately in need of new office building, not now, but before used to have a high price. Therefore, we need more of it. They just blame the intermediary, again, probably in the name of the private interest. Obviously, a developer would develop a property as to make a profit, because if he or she makes a loss, he doesn't stay developer for too long. So, there is no alternative really. Now, how do we get planners away from Rousseau and back to Adam Smith? Well, by the way, here I've been concentrating on the United States or New York even, but this phenomenon is all over the world. With the exception of China, by the way. For one reason, it's not because they necessarily have read Adam Smith. It's because the Chinese mayor do not have a property tax, but their entire source is to sell the land use right. The land belongs to the government, but they sell the land use right, and they sell it for cash. It's a lease, but the lease is notional. But they sell it for cash. So when they decide on the equivalent of zoning, the Chinese equivalent of zoning, next to them is their financial officer who will say, hey, wait a minute, if you limit the floor ratio here, when we auction the land use right, we will get much less money. And therefore, that's why I'm saying that Chinese mayor understand markets better than Mary. And I wonder if it will not be possible to have on the zoning board somebody who knows about property tax and could say, hey, we are losing this. Of course, in New York, I guess that about 50% of the lot do not pay property tax. And usually they are, again, there's a lot of corporate welfare there. And it's not, but I think that one of the solutions would be that. And again, it's a worldwide phenomenon. For me, the most extraordinary experience was to work briefly in New Zealand and to find that New Zealand is probably the most expensive apartment in the world. With a income price ratio of something like 14, sometimes 12, enormous. And it's not that they lack land, New Zealand has the same area as Great Britain, but with a population of 5 million people. in the same area of the UK. So it's not because there's not enough land. By the way, it's a bit the same in Australia. You cannot say that Australian, it's not Bangladesh, they are not or Holland. So there is something wrong here in our regulation and the way we manage our land. It's not normal. And again, we are not talking here about unaffordable housing for very poor people, or say people who are at the bottom of the income scale. We are talking about engineers, university professors who cannot afford housing. This is bizarre. So I will remove anything that the consumer could see. You see, I will not touch fire regulation or sanitation thing at this moment because I'm not competent to discuss them. It's possible that some fire regulation are not very efficient or costly for nothing. It's possible. But there's one thing that the consumer can see. It's the size of an apartment, and it can see how much land this apartment sits on. And therefore, the consumer should be able to decide how much land or floor space they want to consume. And I think that then it should be completely demand-driven. There is no reason to have a minimum apartment size, a maximum number of dwelling units per acre. So some people say, what about the infrastructure? What should I do? Oh, okay, good. So I feel tested, but knowledge, yes. What? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, sir.
There we go. Sorry about that.
So everything which limits the supply of land and housing, do not forget that all those regulations are trying to force the consumer to consume either more floor space or more land that they will normally consume. So they force a consumption on the consumer, and this is arbitrary, as we have seen. It's magic numbers. It's not based on anything. And of course, it's fixed. Some of those numbers were decided 30, 40 years ago and do not move. So, and I will try to move back again to Adam Smith, to consider that the people who are building the cities are, like developers, and are not parasites, but are the one who are building it, and that if they have their own interest, they should be taken seriously. And I will recommend a book from one of my colleagues, Arbitrary Line, or Zoning Broke the American City. I'll fix it. It's a recent, Nolan Gray, I think, is a very interesting person, and I will recommend. He recommends at the end, after a lot of study about it, just the abolition of zoning as we know it. They feel that just tinkering with zoning, saying, well, let us do that, just doesn't work. So I plugged for my book, with also the Portuguese version and the Chinese version. It was published in China in November, so that's I'm very happy with that. I'm not sure if it will be influential. I don't know, but so thank you very much. I've spoken a little too long. I hope there is enough time for question. My wife used to say that I have a bit of Fidel Castro syndrome. I speak a little too long, but
Thanks so much for an informative talk. I wanted to ask you, COVID has been a fascinating time to look at changes in usage of how we live. And of course, we've had so many people who have now started to live at home instead of at work, putting even a more upward pressure on homes. We have couples who can't stand to be in the same house together and need to move to a bigger house with a more office space, right, in the house. At the same time, we've had a drop in the demand for office space. And we see all over the country companies closing offices and offices staying empty. Can you talk in the vein and the spirit of your talk today about the fluidity of transforming office space into places to live and how difficult that is in different places?
Yes, we need two things. First, to monitor the situation very carefully. And the best way to monitor is to monitor prices. But every month, I would say, municipality planners should know the price, the rent and price of different type of floor space in order to monitor what is really happening in the market. You know, we are facing a shock. You know, cities have always confronted external shocks. You know, the COVID is one, but sometimes it's a cost of energy. Sometimes it could be a shortage of something, and you know that. So we have to monitor it. I think there was a tendency some months ago or years ago at the beginning of the COVID to say, let us redesign city for the post-COVID, you know, and so there was, well, everybody will live only on the suburbs, or, you know, I think we have to monitor it. We don't yet know what is happening. And by the way, it's not quite the same from city to cities. You know, for instance, New York seems to be affected by the office building more than some other cities. So we need to monitor it. And of course, the next thing is complete flexibility on zoning, including the use. There is no reason, there is no incompatibility between having an office building next to a residential building or the opposite. Actually, in New York, you know, in the Battery area, you know, the South, you know, Wall Street area, I think about 20 or 30% of office buildings were already converted to housing before the COVID. Now, sometimes there are structural problems, especially for the most recent office building. Again, I monitor that only in New York. It's probably true everywhere, that the most modern office building, because they had an open, open space, you know, most of the office were not cubicle, but open space. They have a very large footprint, which then is a little difficult to transform in apartment because there is a central core that you don't quite know what to do with it. Could have a basketball court, I suppose, or something like that. But, you know, that would be a lot of basketball. I don't know. So there is this, but certainly completely, you know, if you have a 3 or 4 years delay, if you want to convert an office building into housing, just to get the permission, it's very, very dangerous for the developers, because that means the thing will be on the market in 10 years. God knows what will happen in 10 years. And so at least we could reduce all the administrative delay, saying, well, you know, in itself, there's nothing in the world which prevents, you know, if it's possible, if it's financially relevant, to transform an office building into residential. There is nothing. When it comes to adjusting the infrastructure, maybe there is a need, maybe a residential consume more than office building in terms of water forces. Adding a water pipe in the street is peanuts compared to the value of the real estate. Nothing. And it can be done quickly. You know, this is something we know how to do. So it's not a, you know, it's not a trade-off, which is dramatic. Let us do it. So that will be another thing. Is also the transformation of retail. You know, there are some retail space which are shrinking. I think that, and certainly, so the rent in retail should normally go down. But again, here we need a complete flexibility in zoning so that something which was retail could be transformed into a gym or whatever there is demand for. And again, the New York zoning will not allow it. for instance. I don't know how is your zoning in Charleston. You know, when I wrote my book, I tried to calculate, I thought I had to calculate how many zoning categories there were in New York. And when I start calculating them with the overlay and things like that, we change the thing. I realized that if I did that, I would never finish my book. So I decided just to concentrate on the number of zoning category in commercial area. And if I remember well, I ended up with 85 different type of commercial area. You know, there are shops where you can sell bicycle but not repair them. You know, the zoning guide, you know, they are somewhere, you know, you have a hardware store who can sell screwdrivers, but they cannot sell, washing machine or things like that. You know, they can, you know, so again, what is the wisdom there? Some planners know about those things that the retailer doesn't know. So sorry, it's a very long answer to your question, like Fidel Castro syndrome again. Any more questions?
Take the prerogative if no one else will. One of the things you mentioned towards the end is this idea of, you know, the zoning regulation gets put into place, and a lot of times it's been put into place very early on.
Yes.
And then it stays, right? And the zoning no longer fits.
Yes, right, yeah.
How often, if at all, do zoning laws get reevaluated? Would this be at a minimum? Would this be a step in the right direction to at least say periodically, and do they periodically to reevaluate zoning laws and say, let's reassess and decide if these things are still relevant?
Yeah, when I advise cities, usually I say that they should have an audit of land use regulation every year, and taking into account prices. You know, I think that cities should monitor prices, you know, rents and things like that, and but on a very fine grain. And when they see a sudden increase in prices in one area, that should be a blinking indicator, and that they have to transform something. You know, there is a high demand for floor space in one area, and there should be a supply response as fast as possible. So I think that in some cities, the cities of China, which develop very fast, I advocate an audit every quarterly, again, based on those indicators of price. Yes, eventually, I think that we should remove, there is difference between also land use and also, the land use and the bulk of building. And I think many land use categories should be removed. You know, there is no reason. By the way, I'm rather critical of Paris and zoning for a lot of reasons, but there is no zoning really in Paris. You can transform office building or shops into housing and housing in shops without any problem. You have to follow, of course, you cannot change, Paris has to stay the way it was at the time of the Impressionists, but except for that, within the box of this defined by the Impressionists, you can change. You can find, for instance, a lawyer office on the fourth floor of a residential building, for instance. There is no, or a dentist or something. Most of them will prefer to be on the lower floor, obviously. But so you have a mix, the first 2 or 3 floors are, lawyers, dentists, doctors, and then the residential. There is no impediment to that. You don't need a zoning change.
Well, I wonder if you could comment on the issue of historical preservation, because it seems like there's a Smithian piece there where you can imagine that there's a private demand for historical preservation.
Yes.
Quite relevant to this city. It's sort of like a golden goose of sorts. People want to come here and see that sort of antebellum kind of idea. But it seems that perhaps those demands are often served through like Rousseauian zoning kind of means. So I wonder if you could comment on that tension.
Yes. Normally, a city adapts again to external shock or the the growth of the population, things like that. And in order to do that, it needs to recycle land constantly. In my opinion, one of the reasons of the fall of the Soviet Union was the inability to recycle land, because land has no value. So it was only the initiative of the administrator of the city to, for instance, remove industrial land from the CBD, for instance. So this recycling of land, constant recycling of land, is a lifeline of cities. Now, at the same time, cities have a past, have roots, and some buildings have been produced by a Darwinian process. They come from a deep cultural reaction, building which were considered nice, and then somebody else imitated it with slight variation, and this variation become a better building. And so you end up with something which took 200 years, maybe, not here, but in Europe at least, to evolve, a shape to evolve, which again is as respectable as a seagull in flight, but it's a building, because it's a result of this evolution. So I think that those should be preserved. Some neighborhood probably should be preserved, but do not forget that there is a trade-off. There is a very high price to pay for that. But there is so I think there is a gross abuse in some cities of the use of historical preservation for things which are not particularly interesting. Well, the other day, yesterday, we saw this wall there, which is not so far from it, with the 3 arcades, which I don't think this was a product of a Darwinian process, taking a long time, frankly. And I think this is a gross abuse for preventing change. And I remember also in Washington, D.C., I had a colleague who had bought a house which to me looks an ordinary suburban house, but for some reason, she was told that it was Norman revival and that she could not change anything. And I've never heard of Norman revival before, although I'm a student of the École des Beaux-Arts. I thought I knew a lot about architecture, but I missed this one. So that, I think, is an abuse of power. And by the way, I've always been blaming planners. In fact, planners, of course, reflect a tendency of the people who live in cities. When they are well installed in a city, they don't want any change. They feel they have their habit, and so they have a popular support. They are not just crazy guys going around like that. I think they have a support, but this support is extremely costly. This freezing of land, whether it is, no change, the NIMBY, but also banana, build absolutely nothing near anywhere. That's there are a number of acronyms. And by the way, this is becoming more and more common. I'm going in 2 weeks in the city of Porto Alegre in Brazil, and they tell me that one of their main problems is that most of the city has been designed as historical preservation, although there's not much, there's no colonial history there. It's all buildings which are relatively recent, and it's a way from the population to say, we don't want any newcomers, although they live out of the newcomer. Eventually, a city which age stagnate will have a deep, so that's, I think, have to be, and that, I think, is the trade-off for preservation is, limiting preservation to what is really essential. I think it has to be discussed in the press, and to show that it is not a free ride, that it has a very high cost, and there is a trade-off. You cannot. Another thing too, if you have a really historical building which have interesting detail, like I see, some street in Charleston, by the way, very intricate work. Then you have necessarily gentrification. You cannot have an historical building which has interesting details which were done 1 century or 2 centuries ago and maintained by people who pay low rent and possible. So you have to, and this is what's happening in Paris. You know, Paris has been, it's a huge historical preservation. There is a concept, but the result has been gentrification and also movement of many jobs outside Paris, on the suburbs. In my book, actually, there is an illustration of that. The book in the, the number of jobs which have gone just at the limit of Paris, which is not under preservation. So you have this crazy thing that you have this very elaborate subway system, metro in Paris, which allow you to move everywhere. But most of the jobs are outside of the metro now because of the preservation. And of course, the gentrification, because the French taxpayer are paying for the maintenance of Paris. All the theaters, all the museums are heavily subsidized by the state. I'm not saying it's bad, but it makes Paris extremely attractive and therefore jack up the price. And so we have to admit that the result is an enormous gentrification. This is the way it works. You cannot have, a lot of subsidy going to the maintenance of Paris and the beauty of Paris, and at the same time saying, well, there will be a working class neighborhood in Paris. There's not such thing.